Hey, you guys, and welcome to this week's edition of the Pantry Chat Food for Thought. This week, we are getting to hang out with one of my absolute best friends ever, and that is Melissa K Norris. And we're going to be talking about something that I think affects a lot of us, and that is the pull towards convenience foods. You know, as moms especially, we have just been told a lot of things about how we should spend our time. And it creates guilt, but it also creates some situations that are probably not very sustainable, especially when we're walking into a time period here where the economics feel a little bit shaky. So we're going to be diving in today to that idea and what we can be doing instead of buying convenience foods. But before we dive into that, I want to give a shout out and a thank you to today's sponsor. That sponsor today is 4 Jars. Thank you, 4 Jars, for sponsoring this episode of the Pantry Chat. A lot of you guys know that 4 Jars carries a lot of great food preservation equipment that's wonderful for your homestead kitchen. One of the things, though, that I find myself reaching for time and time again is their funnel set. Now, I know there's a lot of funnels out there on the market. You can get a lot of them, but something I love about this set is that it comes with a strainer that fits into the funnel. So yes, it's super useful for using for wide mouth and regular size jars for filling up, jars when we're canning. But I keep finding that I'm grabbing for it for all sorts of other things, from getting my raw milk from the bucket and straining it into our jars, to straining out tinctures with herbs in them, to filling up jars with bulk items. I am just constantly using this. I love that it's stainless steel. I love it so cleanable, but I really, really like that strainer feature. That one makes me happy. So if you're looking for some sort of equipment for your canning or preserving supplies or just your kitchen supplies, make sure you check out 4 Jars. And right now, for being a listener of the Pantry Chat, if you use the promotion code Homesteading Family 10, that's all one word, no spaces. Again, that's Homesteading Family 10. You'll enjoy 10% off your entire order. Okay, so today we're speaking with author and good friend of mine, Melissa K Norris. Now, she doesn't just talk about simple from scratch living, she lives it every single day. Melissa's a busy working mom who's a 5th generation homesteader and a founder of the Pioneering Today community. And she's spent years mastering the balance between modern life and the timeless skills of self-sufficiency. Through her top-ranked podcast and blog, she reaches hundreds of thousands of people, teaching them how to grow their own food, cook nourishing meals from scratch, and create a home that thrives on faith, family, and hard work. Whether it's preserving the harvest, making homemade remedies, or stretching the grocery budget, Melissa shares real-life practical solutions that fit into busy schedules because she knows firsthand what it's like to juggle family, farm, and work. Hey, Melissa, how you doing?
I'm good. I've been looking forward to this.
So we are jumping in and we are tackling a subject that's really near and dear, I think, to my heart, but I think a lot of people struggle with this. And I mean, I'm going to dive right in. We're really, in some ways, talking about mom guilt, right? We're how do you do the best for your family? But life is so fast for everyone right now. Our schedules are so strapped. There's so many things competing for our attention, our time. And so what we're left with is this sense that we should be doing better for our families somehow, but we don't really even know where to start. And for a lot of people, they grew up in this time, like me. I grew up in this time where it was the boxed rices were just coming in, and I think cake mixes had been around for a while, thanks to Betty Crocker. But, it's kind of this time where it was like, oh, you don't need to work so hard. We're going to give you all the answers. You can take the shortcuts and you're going to save a lot of time. And I actually just heard a really interesting statistic that back the government, the United States government, back in the 60s made a prediction that by, I think it was 1975, that people would be working third days because they would have been saving so much time with all of these newfangled devices and all these convenience foods that we would actually be cutting our workday down to a third of the kind of average workday back then. And now we look at it and we're like, yeah, that didn't happen.
Not at all. Like it's laughable. We're both laughing and like, oh boy, did they get that one wrong.
Absolutely. It's the records now show that we're actually spending less time recreating now than we were back when that prediction was actually made. And they thought they were going to save time. We've been lied to in a lot of ways. We've had a lot of dreams out there. We've had a lot of promises that technology, these shortcuts, all these conveniences, all these things that we get and we get to throw away, like all these things are helping us and saving us time. But that's not really the truth.
No.
And so, the question is, as moms who are walking around already dealing with mom guilt, like, how do we think about these messages? Is our time really better spent outside the kitchen?
And that's what it comes down to. I mean, and that's really when we look at, and it's so funny because you say Betty Crocker, and a lot of people don't. Betty Crocker was an imagined person. Betty Crocker was not actually a real person. She was a marketing persona that has been very effective. And actually, and a lot of people don't know that. They actually think Betty Crocker is this. So it's I feel like with so much of our convenience foods, what we have seen is really very good marketing.
Yeah.
And it is that yes, that it's the whole message that your time is better spent doing something else instead of preparing food for your family.
Right.
And so many of us have subconsciously, even myself, like, oh yeah, like we need to save time, but when you step back from it, it's kind of like, but do I? And is it really saving me time? Now, in some cases, you could argue yes, but I feel in a lot of cases, by the time I go to the store to buy the thing, and yes, I'm going to be usually, good Lord, I hope most people aren't buying one thing at a time and making all those individual trips, so you can consolidate, right? But like for me to get in the car, and we live quite a ways away, go in the store, do all the things. I mean, that is taking me time. And in that amount of time, if I have the base things already stocked at home in my pantry, I can create that food in much less time than actually me going to the store, because I have to be present to drive, I have to be present to shop, all those things.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas at home, a lot of the things you can mix the ingredients and then they are simmering. Maybe they're in a slow cooker, they're in the oven. The hands-on time isn't actually as much as it is to go and buy said things. If you have the skill sets to know how to make those basic things. And we've seen now, because so many of us, same, like, yes, there was like the instant rice, like jambalaya in a box, all the hamburger helper items, condensed cream of soups, stovetop stuffing, um, cake mixes, muffin mixes, cornbread mixes. I mean, you name it. Like all of these things were really created and really pushed. And TV dinners. I don't. You remember the frozen TV dinners?
Oh, yeah. That was a thing for a while.
It really was. In fact, we had them so infrequently. I giggle now. I look back because my mom did cook from scratch so much. They were like a treat, getting a frozen TV. And I'm like, oh gosh, that's funny. But because it was novelty and it wasn't something we did very often.
That's how my family felt about boxed cereal. Like we thought that was such a treat when we could get boxed breakfast cereal and my mom would let us eat it and not make us eat a hot breakfast.
Yeah, it's so funny, but true. But it really does for me. I have to look then at, the family unit as a whole, our health, our economics. And I don't believe that it's true that our time is better spent on the convenience food doing something else. Now, short term, every now and then, it's kind of like the 80-20 rule that many of us have heard, do 80% of the time, do the level of where you're happy and don't worry about the other 20%. So there's that. But I have to say, with my own health experience, definitely cooking it from scratch is worth my time investment and my monetary investment, because I've been at the point where I've gotten to pay off hospital bills and lab bills and all of the things. And so financially, and even when it just comes down to looking at the cost of a condensed cream soup of whatnot and not so great ingredients versus making that from scratch with just a little bit of butter and flour and
Mhm.
bone broth and maybe a splash of cream, like, oh my goodness, like it actually is economically cheaper, much better nutritionally, all of those things. And it really doesn't take as long. Now there's some things that do take longer. And I don't know about you, but I have personally noticed this. And I feel like a lot of families, when we actually sit and talk about it, even though I could go and get a takeout pizza or a takeout dinner or mix, where you're mixing things together and heating it up more so than really cooking, there is something, I don't know why, but we don't sit down and have the same enjoyment of the meal or even
Mm.
the gathering and the talking. And I don't know if it's because you're not in the kitchen where people like where the kids or whatever, like when you're working and you start to smell the aromas of like chopping the onions and those types of things. And just even the sounds in the kitchen, it tends to draw people in and it's like a gathering spot, even during the meal prep portion. And then we tend to linger over the food, and there's this conversation and relational building. And I don't feel that we get the same level of that when I'm bringing in convenience foods. I mean, and you could. I mean, there's no like, yes, you can sit down and have the meal the exact same way. We just don't tend to.
Right.
I I don't.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
we definitely find the same thing that like, if somebody runs out and grabs some takeout for dinner, the likelihood of us all sitting down to a meal together once that gets home is actually pretty slim. Whereas if it's a homemade meal, yeah, we're going to sit down and enjoy it together. We just spent time cooking it. And so I think what's really interesting here is that it is so easy to kind of fall into that the tyranny of the urgent, right? If we're not being really intentional about our life, it's so easy to sideline food is just that thing that's going to we'll figure it out as we go. But when you take a full audit of everything and you actually, are like, hey, what about our health? What about our relationships? What about the taste of the food we're consuming? Like all of these different things, it becomes really clear really quickly that food is something that's worth putting the time into, even if we feel like we're a little time strapped. But thank goodness it doesn't have to take us days and days to like have a meal, right? It doesn't have to take the amount of, I think our perception is that a good meal is going to require slaving over the stove for at least an hour. And that's not necessarily true. Do you find that to be true?
Yeah. Well, I mean, because I think a lot of people in today's modern society and context, when you think about the foods that are prepared from scratch, that typically is big holiday meals. I mean, for a lot of families, right? So if your main experience with cooking a from scratch meal is Thanksgiving and Easter and Christmas, and some of those where it is a much more involved in most cases process, then you're going to naturally think, oh my gosh, there's no way that I can do that every day for from scratch meals. And you're right. Most people can't put out that level of production for their meals and dinners every day of the week.
Right.
But it's adjusting that and realizing those are great and we love those, but that is not what's required in order to have 3 squares a day, or even if it's just dinner. If you're like, if I could just get from scratch dinner on the table every night, I would be happy. Realizing that that's not required. But because I think so many people don't see it modeled anymore, where meals are being cooked from scratch, then they don't realize that that is a more of the exception, is those big involved meals, that's not what necessarily cooking from scratch looks like for every day of the week.
So you have a very full homestead. You're a mom. You've got somebody in the house, a kid in the house still. You've got all the things going on, and you work. You put hours in at your desk, at your computer every single day. What does a typical day look like for you, managing all those pieces, but still being able to get meals on the table?
Yeah, I love that question. So typically, I will know what we're going to have for dinner and breakfast and lunch 2 days max, usually. I am not somebody who naturally is a long-term meal planner. I've tried, and it's not something that I can just consistently stay with. It doesn't work with my management and just the way my brain is wired. So instead, I'm like, if I know what we're having for dinner for the next 2 nights, or at least even just the next day, then I'll know, then I can prep whatever needs to be prepped. So for me, I found little pockets. And this is from when I was working outside the home and commuting for years. And this was when my kids were little. And so I'm like, okay, I have this certain amount of time in the morning where I've maybe got 10 or 15 minutes to do something, and that's with getting myself, the kids, anything livestock wise on the homestead before I'm leaving and driving almost 20 miles to my day job. And then when I get home at night, I need to be able to do some type of last minute assembly or something quick, in order to get the food on the table to then rinse and repeat for the whole next of the week till we hit the weekend. And so I still mimic that a lot, where I am doing nighttime prep and morning prep, not very much hands on during the day or really even at dinner time specifically. And so that works really well, even though I am at home. That kind of was just a pattern that I had set and has still worked really well for us. So typically, I will do up a large batch of something for breakfast, and I do that on Saturday or Sunday, just depending on what the weekend schedule looks like. So right now, we've been doing a lot of egg bites because it's springtime and the ducks and the chickens are laying like crazy. I've got a ton of eggs, so it's incorporating kind of whatever is in the fridge produce wise that I need to use up or that I have freeze dried. And I'm just creating those egg bites so they look a little different flavor wise every week, which is nice. So then it's not really quite so much monotony. But it's really easy. So I can make 20 egg bites if I fill two of my muffin tins, and then I've got breakfast for everybody for the entire week, and it's just taken care of. And so I really love batching where you can like that. And yes, it's like, oh, well, you're eating the same thing every morning for breakfast. Yeah, pretty much. If anybody doesn't like that, they are more than welcome to cook whatever they would like for their breakfast. But that's what mom's doing. And usually everybody's happy to go with that. So I like to do something like that where I'm not doing something every day in the kitchen for breakfast, aside from grabbing those and going. And then lunch is typically leftovers, or sandwiches, kind of with whatever we've got leftover hodgepodges from what for dinner is. So really, I'm looking at creating and cooking dinner each night. Now, my family is smaller now. My son's out of the house. It's my husband, myself, and my daughter. So most of the times we do have leftovers. So if I'm cooking dinner, right, then I know pretty much guaranteed that we're going to have leftovers of the same thing the following night. And everybody in my family has learned if they're not happy with that, again, they're welcome to cook something else. Most of them choose to just be happy with the leftovers.
That's a good decision.
Great decision. Like that's up to them. Yeah. So for me, kind of the same thing. Sunday is really my prep day where I try to do a large piece of meat that has like the bone in. So like a whole chicken, a roast or ham or something that's a bit larger where we can have it that night, like roast chicken for dinner, for example, on Sunday night. And then I've got the bone so I can make broth throughout the week as we've went through that. Because broth is like, I don't know how kitchens operate without broth. That is, I feel like, the foundation of almost everything that we cook in some form or another. We use a lot of broth. So I'm almost making broth almost every week, if not every other week, just because it makes my life so much faster when I'm making the other things throughout the week. But that way I've got my big piece of protein that's been cooked, and then I can decide, okay, am I going to take this leftover meat and turn it into chicken salad for sandwiches for lunch? Am I going to turn this into a casserole, into a soup, into, pot pie, whatever it may be, that I can then turn it into later that week? And because the protein part has already been prepped and cooked, that actually makes for pretty fast dinner, even though they're all still from scratch, um, throughout the rest of the week,
Yeah,
or at
that
least
makes
the first
sense.
half of the week, I should say. Yeah.
So, a combination of big batch cooking, thinking ahead, like making things that you can have later in the week with some easy to make items, kind of pull together those nice, easy weekday meals where you're like, I just don't have a lot of time.
Yeah.
That's
Yes.
awesome. So if you're a brand new mom and you're looking at this and maybe all that you've known is the convenience food cooking, what are the top skills you would say somebody would need to learn in the kitchen to really help them move forward?
I love this. Honestly, one of the first I would say is learning how to master a basic roux or sauce making. Because you can take a roux and essentially turn it into gravy, into homemade gravy. You can take it and make homemade condensed versions. They're not condensed, but you can make, anything homemade condensed cream of, chicken of, celery of. You can make all of those. So you just eliminate having to buy those soups. And then you can also make, your Alfredos. Like you can turn it, if you can master that basic roux, then you can turn it into any type of white sauce that you might need, and like a bechamel if you want to make lasagna with a white sauce, or just pasta and noodles. Like really a basic roux and knowing how to make sauce and gravy, then you can almost make anything, like, because those are such a basis of so many different dishes, and they're fast. I mean, making a roux and a gravy, literally you can create those in like 4 to 5 minutes. I'm talking like cook time to finish. They're incredibly fast. People just don't realize. If you've never made them, you don't know. They're
I
so
actually
fast.
timed myself one time, like heating up cream of mushroom soup, like heating it up, opening a can, dumping it into a pot and heating it up. And it was like 2 minutes longer to make a homemade version
Yeah.
from heating it up. Plus, I mean, we know the ingredients in that stuff is so bad for you. And the
Yes.
flavor difference is just to die for.
Yeah.
The homemade is so incredibly good, but it just doesn't actually take that much longer
It
to
doesn't.
make from scratch.
No. No,
It's
it doesn't.
surprising.
And the versatility, I think that's the thing. Like, I mean, it's just, if you decide to brown your butter in flour, it doesn't have to be flour. You can use cornstarch or, different things if you're gluten free. But really, like, even just deciding like I'm going to take this darker to get, that more pronounced flavor, or no, I want it to be a little bit more wild because I want that if I'm going to add cheeses to it, I want that to be more enhanced, or whatever it is. I mean, like, you can adjust the flavor on it, and it's simply by just you're essentially roasting the flour and butter, right? A little bit longer. But just that base, but the
Mhm.
flavor variances that you can create, and also the richness level. So a lot of times I'll just do a lot of bone broth because you're getting incredible nutrition. It makes your cost go way down. And then I'm like, okay, if I need it to be a little creamier, then maybe I'm going to add a little bit of milk. If I want it to be really decadent, right, then I'm going to use a little bit of whole cream. But you can really change the flavor of it and the decadence of it super easy, but you can make it so economical, and really that secret is bone broth for me. So instead of doing all milk, for example, I you can do half bone broth and half milk, and I don't think that you can really taste the difference versus using all milk. Like
Oh, there you go.
it's very minute, and then you're getting all of the I sound like a bone broth like talk person,
We're
but
just
I love bone broth. Yes.
I agree. We pretty much every single day have a pot of bone broth cooking in our house. But, with 15 people often eating at our table, we go through a lot of bone broth too. Most
Yeah.
people can get away with making one big batch a week and doing just fine. But for us, we're like, yeah, it's not enough. We need more because we're the same way. We love it. But I love the way you frame that the roux and sauce is based off of a simple roux, which for those of you guys who are really new beginners, a roux is just a mixture of flour that's cooked in a fat.
Mhm.
So, generally we usually use butter. However, I will make a roux using lard,
Yeah.
especially if we have dairy-free people that are coming to visit. We will use our good home rendered lard, and it makes a wonderful roux. And you can turn that into, like Melissa said, gravies. You can turn it into like a thick condensed soup. You can turn it into a cream of soup that's not condensed. You can turn it into just about any kind of sauce that you can think of. And you can flavor it in every different way. And the coolest thing is it's a single skill. You don't even need a recipe. Like,
Yeah.
it is a skill that you build, and once you know it, you can craft endless varieties of these different types of sauces and gravies. So that's really neat. Do you have any other skills? I mean, bone broth, kind of, you saying that bone broth is kind of one of them right there, isn't it?
It really is, and bone broth is so simple. Now, of course, there's all the nuances, like if you watch chefs talk and all these different things, like there's different opinions on doing it. But if you're like, I have no time and you're wanting to do it the most economical way possible, for me, that is just saving the carcasses of our chickens when I roast a whole chicken. So, we've picked the meat off and any, whatever. I throw that in a bag in the freezer and I freeze it. And then throughout the weeks when I'm prepping any type of vegetables, I take the onion skins, the ends of carrots, that you're typically not using the end with a little bit of greens. Even if you use the green, there's like those little nubs, those types of things. And I will just, any scrap vegetables and peelings that is going to taste good. I will be honest, like I don't usually throw brassicas in there. Like I don't usually put broccoli in there, but the tops of celeries or celery leaves and carrots. And if you're peeling the carrots for something, the peels, all the onion skins. People think onion skins are papery. And so often we're not eating those, but there's incredible vitamins and mineral content in the skin of the onion. And so we'll save those. They also help to improve the color. They give it that nice deep color, but they add a lot nutritionally. And then like the little bits of the ends of the onion where you get it, pretty close to the end, but there's like a little bit of actual onion on there. I just throw those all in a broth bag. And then when it comes to the day I'm going to make my broth, I dump all of it frozen into my slow cooker or Instapot. I dump it all in frozen. And then if I've got extra onions or fresh herbs or whatever, then at the time of year, usually I've got rosemary even in the winter, I'll go out and grab some of the rosemary, throw some rosemary sprigs in there. Maybe I'll take a whole onion, depending on how much I had in my broth bag of frozen veggies, add that, top it all off with water, add a little bit of good sea salt, and then Instapot, I high pressure that for 60 minutes. Slow cooker, usually that just varies, but on slow cooker, 12 to 24 hours, depending on how rich and how much of the collagen and gelatin you want to have out. But it's literally maybe 5 minutes of hands-on time.
Mm.
And then you've got a really great mild chicken stock that still has good flavor, lots of nutrition. So that's like my easy peasy, you have no time and you're going to get broth done every week.
That is such a simple way to just add so much nutrition to everything. We've talked about boxed rices a few times between you and me here. I think we both like that was the era I grew up in, was boxed rice, and I thought the only good tasting rice came out of a box. Come to find out, it's super easy to replicate and make even better than that at home, just by sauteing some veggies and then cooking the rice in broth instead of in just adding water. And so, it's a great way to just add nutrition to so many things, but also add that flavor that just takes it to a whole nother level and makes it so incredibly good. So, yeah. So that's fun. Two really solid kitchen skills. If you were a brand new mom who's feeling overwhelmed with the idea of cooking from scratch, or brand new in the kitchen, maybe I should say, where would you tell somebody to start?
I would say start on whatever day of the week, and that includes weekend, where you have some space. Because if we don't have space for something and it's not something we're comfortable with, you might do it once or twice, but you've stressed yourself out so much because you don't have the margin that you're not going to come back to it, because all you're associating it with is the stress in most cases. So picking a day of the week where you have got some space and deciding, okay, this space is intentional, like I'm blocking it out to learn a new skill set and to cook from scratch. So for most folks, depending on your schedule, I feel that is usually a Saturday or a Sunday, like afternoon, evening, for like that night's dinner. So set that aside and just make that a part of your schedule where you're determined that you're going to do it, like you've committed, and then decide what you're going to make that night for a dinner. And if you have never really cooked anything from scratch, I would say if you can get that main protein or the main part of dinner down, that to
Uh-huh.
start there. Like I would start there and like don't even worry about the sides yet. Just focus on that one thing, like learning how to roast a chicken, or how to saute meat with vegetables and do a stir fry. But whatever it is, like the protein, I feel like once you have the protein down of the meal and you're very then confident in cooking and preparing that, the sides are easier to pull in,
Mm.
personally.
Yeah.
So get yourself started on that, learning how to, roast a chicken, or how to braise a roast, how to braise meat. Just kind of those simple things. Maybe it's grilling, like maybe like grilling a really good steak. I love steak. Ribeye is my favorite, but determining that part and just focusing on one part of it. And then once you've got that down, you're like, okay, like I know how to do this. It turns out consistently, like we love it. Then add in that next layer. And then
Mm.
you're going to build that confidence and you're going to know how long things take you. And then it's easier to start to work that into the places and the dates where you might not have as much space. Where you're like, well, I know that this me this XYZ amount of time. Or because you've done it on that Saturday or Sunday, then Monday night, you're like, oh, I have leftovers. If I just add, this to that, then I've got a soup or I've got an easy casserole. It makes the next day's cooking easier.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. So, fast meals. What are some of your favorite go tos?
I had some making like taco meat, right? Like do it like ground beef, ground
Hmm.
turkey, any type of ground meat. It's very, very quick to cook up. And just by the seasonings or the spices that you decide to put in it, like you can completely change it and have almost a brand new meal. So of course, I just, I don't buy taco seasoning packets, but it'll be some chili powder, garlic powder, onion powder, cumin, and a little bit of paprika, and then salt and fresh ground black pepper, right? You've got a basic taco seasoning there, however hot you want to make it or back it off. And that, if we're doing tacos with actual tortillas, that's fine. Or to your point, sometimes we'll do like taco bowls where I will cook rice in the broth, cooking dried beans, and doing that, and then we'll kind of mix that together. I'll put the meat on it, and then whatever like fresh veggies we have or whatever, and make a bowl. Like it doesn't always have to be in tortillas. So I do love tortillas, and I love like a great or taco salad if we're looking at summertime at that. But then you can do the opposite. Like you can use different types of herbs and do more of like a Greek or a Mediterranean where you're bringing in like feta cheese or blue cheese and olives and like, oh, there's so many different variations, but I feel like ground meat is something that is hard to mess up as far as like tenderizing and texture wise. And just by your seasonings, like, or instead, like throw some tomato sauce in there and make like sloppy joes or something. Like you can really take it so many different directions. And it cooks
Yeah.
fast. Ground meat cooks pretty fast.
So we actually have pretty much the same thing. Like if we call our emergency meals. And so a lot of times we'll stock our pantry filled with pre-made convenience meals, but sometimes we'll be running low on those, or for some reason we don't want to use them, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so last night we actually had a moment where my daughter, who was responsible for dinner that night, realized that she had not taken the meat out in time for it to defrost. And it was something like fillets of fish. So it really needed to be defrosted to cook well.
Yeah.
So she was like, oh my goodness, what do I do? And I was like, okay, this is when we pull out the emergency meals, because something we have found is that you can cook ground beef from frozen if you have to in a very short amount of time. I know a lot of people will pull out their instant pot for this and make it work. I don't think they make an instant pot that holds the amount of meat that we have to have for our family.
Probably
So
not.
for us, we pull out our giant 17-inch cast iron pan with a big lid and get that all cooked up. And in that amount of time, we can cook them some rice and chop up whatever veggies we can find. And it's like you have that instant taco bowl.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, to feed 15 people, instant is relative. You're talking 20 to 25 minutes, but still, that's a fast meal.
Yeah.
And it's a really great go to. Do you have any others that are your favorite, like really quick meals?
Yeah, oftentimes it's making like it's making a soup or a stew,
Mhm.
and kind of the same thing. Like I have canned on the shelf, like canned chicken. I even have canned we smoke and canned salmon. So sometimes I'll just take that and then I'll just make like a quick bisque. Again, it's like coming back to making instead of starting with the roux, but then adding, thinning it out and putting the smoked salmon in there, or I'll do like a salmon cakes because those are fast where I can just take an egg and the salmon and a little bit of herbs and then fry that up. Often, usually I don't even add breadcrumbs, honestly, when I'm doing something like that. Those can be really fast ones that I rely on, or even having, again, like you can even make hamburger soup, right? If you've got
Mhm.
that ground beef and you do that and you're like, okay, I'm going to add broth. So going back to that, like, yeah, like doing a soup or a stew is something that's pretty fast, especially if you have either the protein is cooked or if it's ground, because you can cook it from frozen Really quick. If you do have frozen, I wouldn't recommend fish, but if you do have frozen chicken, especially boneless, like chicken breasts in the freezer, if you have the Instapot, you actually can cook those from frozen extremely fast. And then you can, shred those up. And so sometimes I'll shred it up. And if we're doing like more of a Mexican flair, I'll add in some salsa, right? And just shred that in with the chicken, and kind of the same thing if we're not wanting the ground meat. But if I'm deciding like, oh, I'm going to cook, a soup or something like that, then I have that protein really fast, even if it is frozen from the Instapot, and then I can just add it to the sauce from the roux base.
And it's amazing how fast you can pull together a meal like that.
It's
Um,
really fast, actually.
it
Yeah.
doesn't take that much time on active work, especially if you have something like the Instant Pot working for you and doing, kind of the cooking side. You
Yeah.
can actually get all that together in probably under 5 minutes, get it started, and then go, fold the laundry or, get your work clothes on. If you've been, in your work, if you've been in your office work clothes, you could go get your homestead work clothes
Yeah.
on, or whatever it is that you need to do while that's actually cooking, and it doesn't take that long. One of the things though that's really hard, I find, it's something we talk about a lot here on the pantry chat, is that learning the skill is one thing. And actually, for a lot of us, there is so much information floating around out there now. Like, all we have to do is type in 15-minute meal on Pinterest. But the challenging thing to do really is to change the mindset, to make that mindset shift to saying that, no matter what all these voices are telling me, like I have to go achieve more, I have to make more money, I have to get the kids in more activities, more sports, do more. What is the mindset shift that you made to be able to prioritize meals for your family instead of all the other things out there that are like trying to get your attention?
Yeah. Mine was having my stomach and esophagus biopsied for cancer at 29. And I realized that I hope that many people don't go through that, quite honestly. But that,
Right.
for me, that was it. And it came back and it was benign. So I didn't have cancer, but I had erosion on my esophagus, and I had cellular change in both spots, which is like your precursor basically to precancerous cells. Like it was in those very beginning stages. And so like so thankful that it was caught at that stage, and that I had a specialist who said, you need to get off of all the medications you're on. The doses you've been on for the amount of time you've been on them are above anything that you should have been on. I don't know why your general practitioner doctors even allowed prescribed you those at those doses. I'm like, oh, at that time, and I didn't know what I know now. Like, oh goodness, what 16 years you can learn. And so he said, you have got to figure out how to control the stomach acid. So I had GERD with ulcers that was creating all of the acid and the erosion. And so he said, you've got to figure out by the food that you're eating how to control this. Because if you don't, the next time you come back in my office, then this will be a very different lab result, most likely. So that is, I mean, that's pretty like, whew. And I was like, okay. So I felt like for me, I would still remember I was driving home. We live really rurally, so it was a long drive home, and I had this stack of papers and the test results and everything on the seat beside me. And I just remember thinking like, this is a pivotal moment. Like I either choose to make changes, to be dedicated and to figure this out, or I most likely am going to develop cancer and not be here when my kids are older. And at that time, my youngest was a infant and my son was 4. And so for me, I went home and I didn't feel like I had a choice, quite honestly. I'm like, this really felt like life or death to me. And I realized from a lot of people that doesn't, I hope that you're not at that point. If you are, these changes are still worth making. So for me, I threw everything out that was a genetically modified ingredient that had ingredients I didn't know how to pronounce, or I didn't know what they were on the package. I got rid of all of that. And then I realized that so much of what I was buying in the store, once I started reading the ingredient labels, I was like, this is not things that I am putting in my body or in my family's bodies any longer. And so I had to figure out ways to make them at home because at that point in time, I couldn't afford to buy pre-made better ingredients. And a lot of times they just didn't exist. I should have more options now, but they didn't exist. And so I had to figure out, I was still commuting to work 36 miles a day at the pharmacy. Like, how do I make this work? Um, and so that's where, for me, I was just like, this is worth it. Like, I was paid off those hospital bills for the endoscope and all of those things. I mean, those took me almost a year to pay off, even with insurance, with what our portion was. And so I'm like, I know what it costs health wise. I know what it costs financially. And it is worth my time to learn these and to stick to it. So I hope it's one of those cases where people can hear my story and not have to go through quite that much, and then be able to glean and to be able to implement some of the things without quite that level of hardship.
I think nowadays, especially post COVID, so many people are surrounded by some of these issues. You know, we're seeing now the numbers come out post COVID of cancer rates, and they're starting to go, oh my goodness, this is soaring in a way we never thought. Heart conditions. Um, so I think so many of us, even if we're not experiencing it ourselves, we're seeing people that we know and love around us that are struggling with these very real things. And I think it's very eye-opening to us to say, this isn't normal. This isn't how it should be. But the eye-opening part of all of it is that we actually have a choice. We don't have to participate in the things that are making us sick. We can say, you know, the convenience or the perceived convenience is not worth my health or my family's health. And we can make that choice. But I think there's a really delicate balance, because we do want to prioritize these things. We do want to give them the spot that they deserve. But if you're a mom, you're totally aware of mom guilt, because that's kind of the other side of the spectrum, is this feeling of like, I should be doing more. I should be doing more. Um, how do you push back against that while still trying to change your priorities in life?
I found this very fascinating. I just read this in a book, and I cannot remember now what book I was reading it in, to who to attribute this to, but they were sharing they had heard someone else say it. So I feel like, okay, I found this astounding. So it was talking about kind of that work-life balance. And even if you're a stay-at-home mom, you still have a work-life balance, right? Your work might not be outside the home, but you still have plenty to do. And then and you have we have relationships, you have your health, you have perhaps a spiritual relationship, that type of thing, all of those different things. And it said to imagine each one of your responsibilities or the things that you have to do as juggling balls. However, all of those balls are glass. So your health is a glass ball, your relationships are glass balls, all of the things are glass balls except your work. That is rubber.
Hmm.
And so if you drop that ball, it's going to bounce and it's going to be okay. And you're going to be able to pick it back up and throw it in that rotation when you need to. However, those other balls, they're glass. And when you drop them, they might chip. So they'll always be chipped. You'll never have, it'll never be quite the way it was before. It might crack or it might full on shatter. And that visualization, I had to sit, I almost cried when I read it. I was like, that's pretty incredible and also very, very true. It's very true. But so often we prioritize things that we don't necessarily have to prioritize. We just think we do. And so when I put it into that lens, I was like, wow. So what are the most important things? I think knowing what they are really to you. And that was just a good visualizational tool for myself to help me as like a filter, and to be like, okay, what am I prioritizing? And what really matters at the end of the day and or at the end of my life. And
Yeah.
then and making sure, and I think oftentimes, I don't know, I'll go through seasons where sometimes those things are much more clear. Maybe someone has passed away close to you, or there's just things that there's moments we have in our lives that tend to bring those things into greater clarity and more front of mind. And then we get into the busyness of life again. So it's remembering to come back to that evaluation, especially if you're feeling overwhelmed or if you're feeling like I'm not able to hit the priorities that I want, and taking a step back and being like, why not?
Mhm.
And what needs to go, what truly can be set down that will bounce, so that I can make sure I'm protecting the glass things that can't survive that dropping.
Yeah, that's really good. That's a very sobering thought, I guess. Maybe a little convicting about what things you can drop and what things you can't. And sometimes we think some things are rubber in our mind, or we treat them like they're rubber, only to find out they really are glass.
Yeah.
And hopefully, we don't find out too late. I know one thing for me that has really helped, because, especially homesteaders, a lot of us are feeling like we want to see this progress that we're trying to make right now. We want to see it done like 6 months ago, right? Like we want to already have arrived at that spot that we're working at, and we're pushing hard to get there. And one thing that really has helped me to battle this, like I should do more, this kind of mom guilt, is to think about it in, am I moving in the right direction rather than have I arrived?
Mm.
I've never once ever heard in a book, in a quote, talking to a person like, I did enough as a mom. I'm good. Like, you never hear somebody say that. And what that says to me is there's always more. You can
Yeah.
always do more, and you can always feel guilty about not having done enough if you choose to feel guilty. So to me, when I start feeling that way, I go, okay, like, do I have my priorities right? Like you were just saying. And then, am I moving in the right direction, or am I moving in the wrong direction? Because you can only make so many changes at any one time and keep them to be a lasting change. And so just moving in the right direction, I've determined, is good enough for me. Even if part of me is like, oh, I wish I was already there. Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? And we're like, no, but we're getting there. We're headed that direction. And that has got to be enough. It's like, nope, I'm doing better this week than I did last week. I'm doing better this year than I was doing last year. And that's enough. That's good enough for me. So, wow, we've covered a lot. But for people who are inspired, that maybe they're like, oh, I need to learn a little bit more. I'm not really sure how to begin, or maybe I feel like I don't quite have the skills that I need. What would be their best next step?
I have a new book coming out, which is actually a reissue of Home and Handmade. And I know that almost sounds so cliche. Go buy my book. But honestly, it is everything. When I was like, I've got to revamp everything because of this health diagnosis, it was every single thing that I did, and the recipes that I learned, the foundational things that I learned, the nutritional things that I learned. And it was like the guidebook that I wish I had back then, that
Mhm.
I had to figure out on my own and implement. And so it's all of that with the refinement then of taking all of those skills and now having used them for almost 16 years, and being able to go back and, go back to 10 years ago and being like, "Oh, tweak this, it's going to do so much better," and being able to put that into a printed form, and be a handbook or a guide to someone, for that, so that they've got like that mentor that I wish I had had. And I had mentors in different fashions, but I didn't have anybody that was like that one skill set that was like, here you go, where it's written out for you, you can follow this.
I think that's so great. I have gotten to see a pre copy of this, and I'm really excited about it. So, if you guys are interested in grabbing a copy, we'll make sure that we have a link for you in the show notes so you can grab it. I really encourage you to go check it out, especially if you're at a place where you feel like you're really learning the skills still to make, cooking in your house a priority for you that really brings more health, more nutrition, but still is really practical and reasonable to do in an already busy life. So make sure you go and check that out. Melissa, where can they come find you if they want to just hear more of your story?
Yeah, my website, melissaKnorris.com. You'll see there my podcast, the Pioneering Today podcast, where I really can go into and do go more depth into that and really, diving into the things I've learned about health. Like that was the beginning of the journey. And I love that you pointed that out earlier. It is the journey because that food part was so foundational, and I was able to heal from the stomach ulcers and get off all of the prescription medications I was on. It took like 6 months to wean off from the doses I was on. But now I've been off of them. I've never had to go back on them. And that was definitely from the food. However, like 15 years later, there's been different health things. And so even with that, it's like knowing that you are on that journey, and for me, I'm like, am I doing a little bit more than I was, like you said, a year ago, a week ago? Like, am I walking in that right direction, even though I'm not necessarily where I want to be? And I see that with my own health journey, maybe even more so, honestly, with my homesteading journey, looking at just like skill sets and what we're producing, etc., on our homestead. So that is such wise words. Thank you for
Mm.
sharing them. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us. And it's always fun to get to chat. So thank you.
Thanks.